I woke up thinking I was still dreaming, because outside my window, my land looked like a neon music festival had erupted overnight. 500 tents, RVs crammed nose to tail, bonfires flickering like orange scars across my pasture. And right in the middle of it all stood Karen, the self-appointed queen of the HOA, balancing on a plastic table, megaphone in hand, shouting, "Welcome to the Freedom Campout." I didn't remember inviting anyone, and I sure as hell didn't remember giving permission for strangers to treat my grazing fields like a county fairground. My no trespassing signs were flapping in the wind, ignored like yesterday's newspapers. My neighbors cheered, beers cracked open, music blasted, and in that moment one thought ran through my head. If Karen wanted a show, I was about to give her one she'd never forget. Most people in my shoes would have called the cops, maybe begged the sheriff to clean up the mess. Not me. I poured my coffee, leaned on the gate, and smiled. Because I knew something Karen didn't. You don't grow up on a ranch without learning how to deal with trouble. And trouble had a face that morning. Wide-brimmed sun hat, clipboard clutched in her hand, sunglasses hiding those cold eyes. Her name was Karen. Now you need to understand something. This ranch wasn't just land. It was my father's legacy. He worked these 200 acres before me and his father before him. Fence posts driven deep, soil broken by calloused hands, sweat poured into every corner of this property. My cattle weren't just livestock, they were family. Every sunrise, every storm, every quiet evening leaning on that fence line, it was ours. It was home. But to Karen, my ranch was an eyesore, an inconvenience, a stubborn scar against her perfect little subdivision. Her vinyl-sided kingdom had popped up 4 years ago, rows of cookie-cutter houses lined up like toy blocks. Within 6 months, she declared herself HOA president, not because anyone asked her, but because nobody else wanted the job. And once she had power, she thrived on it like a plant thrives on sunlight. It started small, petty letters in my mailbox, complaints about unauthorized vegetation growth. Noise complaints about the bulls lowing at night. I laughed at them, tossed them aside. But those letters became threats, then meetings, then demands that I join their HOA, even though my deed predated their development by 40 years. The final straw, they paved a community trail right up to my fence line. Their brochures bragged about Greenbelt access, but the so-called Greenbelt was my pasture, my land, my father's fence posts. And Karen strutted that trail like it was her personal stage, telling joggers she was negotiating with the rancher to open the pasture for community events. She never asked me, she just decided. See, my dad used to tell me, "Son, don't get into a shouting match with a fool. Folks might not know the difference." So I didn't shout, I documented, I posted signs, I tightened my fences, and I trusted the land to speak when the time came. But Karen, she had other plans. She hated my bulls most of all. 24 of them massive, black as midnight, calm as granite when handled right. 2,000 pounds of muscle and horn trained to follow my whistle. She called them wild animals, claimed they endangered her subdivision. The county agent came out once, patted me on the back, and told her to go home. That only made her angrier. So when a flyer landed in my mailbox one Thursday, I knew trouble was about to kick down my door. Bold letters, bright colors, Freedom Campout. Food trucks, bonfires, camping under the stars, location, community Greenbelt. And right there in HOA language, I knew what it meant. Greenbelt was code for my pasture. I stormed into their rented clubhouse, map in hand. Karen didn't even look up from her clipboard when I asked for clarification. She just smiled that fake HOA smile and said, "The maps show it's shared space. Don't worry, we'll clean up after." I laughed in her face. "Lady, you can't even get your board to clean up the dog park, and you want to promise me you'll clean up after 500 campers." Her lips thinned. She scratched her pen across her clipboard and said, "This is bigger than you. The community deserves this. You're just being selfish." Selfish, that word hung in the air like a bad smell. I slapped the deed on the table, my voice low but sharp. "This is my fence line, my property. Step one more boot on it and you're trespassing." She smiled wider. "We'll see about that." And I walked out knowing what was coming. By Friday afternoon, the county road outside my place looked like a parade. SUVs, campers, RVs stretching half a mile, portable stages hammered together, fire pits dug into my pasture, kids tearing down my no trespassing signs like souvenirs. And in the middle of it all, Karen climbed onto her table, megaphone raised, shouting, "The community spirit has won." I sat in my truck. I didn't honk. I didn't yell. I just watched my bulls grazing at the far end of the field and smiled. Because I already knew exactly how this was going to end. Friday afternoons on the ranch used to mean peace. The sun sinking low, painting the grass in gold. My herd grazing steady, their shadows stretching long across the pasture. But that Friday, my quiet road rattled like a carnival parade. SUVs, campers, lifted pickups hauling trailers stacked with kayaks and coolers rolled in one after another. It looked like the opening scene of a county fair, only this wasn't a fairground. It was my land, my father's land. By 5 o'clock, every inch of the easement road was clogged. Strangers spilled beer on my gravel drive, blocking me in as though I were the intruder. I tapped my horn, rolled down my window, and a man swaggered over in cargo shorts and a neon vest. He flashed a plastic badge that read, HOA Security. "Sorry, buddy," he said with a smirk. "Campground's at capacity. You'll need to park elsewhere." I stared at him. "Elsewhere? Son, you're standing in my driveway." His smirk faltered. He looked back at the sea of tents rising like weeds across my pasture, then muttered something about checking with President Karen before jogging off. And sure enough, here she came. Clipboard under her arm, megaphone in her hand, sunglasses hiding the fire in her eyes. She looked like she was auditioning for some reality show. "Oh, it's just the rancher," she called into the megaphone, her voice amplified across the crowd. "Don't mind him, folks. He's being dramatic." The crowd laughed, beers lifted in a toast. Karen waved her hand like I was some unruly child interrupting playtime. "The community has spoken. The greenbelt is ours to enjoy." Heat rolled off the asphalt, but my temper burned hotter. I stepped out of my truck and kept my voice low, sharp, steady. "Karen, you've got 500 people on my deed land, every fire pit, every RV, every folding chair trespassing. I've got signs posted every 50 feet, and you know damn well where the boundary lies." Her megaphone squealed as she raised it again. "Ladies and gentlemen, don't worry. He's just trying to intimidate us. The law is on our side." That got a cheer. Phones shot up into the air, recording me like I was the villain of her little story. And just like that, I understood her game. Karen didn't just want my land. She wanted a spectacle. A story she could spin, making me look like a bitter cowboy standing in the way of community spirit. Well, two could play that game. I pulled out my own phone, hit record, walked straight to the fence where my no trespassing sign had been torn halfway off. I filmed the busted post, the line of campers spilling across my property, and Karen, perched high with her megaphone, smirk glued to her face. I narrated every detail like I was hosting a crime documentary. Then I called the sheriff. When the deputy finally rolled up an hour later, his cruiser had to crawl through a gauntlet of beer coolers and RVs. He stepped out, hat pulled low, the look of a man who'd seen this circus before. "Evening, sir," he said. "We've had a few noise complaints. What seems to be the issue?" I gestured wide at the chaos. "The issue is 500 trespassers on my land, campfires dug into grazing pasture, fences cut, driveway blocked. This isn't permitted. It's a trespass. Plain and simple." Before he could answer, Karen strutted up, waving papers like they were golden tickets. "Don't listen to him, deputy. This is a civil matter. We're exercising our right to community enjoyment of the greenbelt." The deputy skimmed her papers, frowned, then gave me a look that made my stomach twist. "She's right, sir. This is a civil dispute over boundaries, not criminal. I can't remove them without a court order." My jaw clenched, so they get to stay until a judge says otherwise. Karen's smirk widened like she just hit the jackpot. The crowd cheered again, drunk on her victory. The deputy muttered something about being short-staffed, tipped his hat, and drove off. And just like that, I was left standing in the middle of a circus. My pasture burning under the weight of their bonfires, my land treated like a county fairground. But I didn't lose my cool, not yet. Because my father's words came back to me clear as day, "Don't waste your breath fighting on their terms. Let the land do the talking." So I went home, sat at my kitchen table under a single lamp, poured another cup of coffee, and pulled out the binder my father left me, survey maps, property deeds, livestock laws, all neatly filed for a rainy day. And brother, it was pouring. Those maps showed it in black and white. My fence lines, my grazing easement, the open-range statutes that gave me protections Karen couldn't dream of. She thought she was clever, calling my pasture a green belt. But legally, it was a working ranch, and the law was on my side. I didn't plan to swing fists or shout louder. No, I planned to end this slow, methodical, unforgettable. So that night, I typed up a formal notice of livestock movement, filed it with the sheriff, the county commissioner, and animal control. It stated clearly, at high noon tomorrow, I'd be moving my bulls from one pasture to another. Perfectly legal, perfectly ordinary ranch work. Anyone on the property without authorization would be responsible for their own safety. Then I wrote a letter to the HOA board. No threats, just facts, trespass, liability, fire hazards, photos attached of ripped-down fences and fire pits dug straight into dry grass. By sunrise, copies of that notice were taped to Karen's shiny Lexus, sitting crooked at the trailhead. See, when you deal with someone like Karen, you don't just fight back. You build a wall of receipts so high that when the truth comes out, there's nowhere left for them to climb down. By the time I set my coffee cup down that morning, I knew one thing for certain. At noon, when those bulls started moving, this wasn't going to be Karen's festival anymore. It was going to be my parade. High noon in July is no joke on a ranch. The sun hangs like a white-hot coin in the sky, burning every shadow into the dirt. The air is thick, buzzing with flies, heat waves, and tension you can feel in your chest. That morning, I woke to the sound of generators sputtering, music thumping, kids shrieking like they owned the place. Karen's so-called freedom campout was still roaring, but I wasn't worried, not anymore, because I had a plan. I whistled for Jake and Tom, two ranch brothers who'd wrangled alongside me for years. We walked the herd just after breakfast. 24 bulls, black as midnight, steady as stone. Their hides shone in the morning light, horns glinting sharp. They weren't angry, they weren't wild, they were patient, waiting. By 10 o'clock, word was spreading through the campground. Whispers that the rancher was going to bring the cattle through. Some campers laughed it off, calling the bulls overgrown puppies. Others looked nervous. But Karen, she strutted through the tents with her clipboard, her megaphone swinging from her hand. "He won't dare," she told anyone who'd listen. "The law is on our side, he's bluffing." The truth was, the law wasn't on her side at all. It was in my binder, in every stamped notice, every photo of a ripped-down sign, every county statute that said I had the right to move my livestock. And when the clock struck 12, the only law that mattered was the oldest one: respect the land or get out of its way. I stood at the north gate, hand on the latch, Jake and Tom flanking me. Behind the fence, 24 bulls lined up like cavalry, their breath steaming in the noon sun. Karen spotted me from across the pasture. She raised her megaphone, her voice trembling with anger. "Don't you dare." I smiled. "Oh, I dare." The latch clicked, the chain rattled into my pocket, and the pasture began to move. The first snort echoed like a cannon across the field. The herd lifted their heads in unison, massive shoulders rippling under black hides. Dust curled up from their hooves as they stepped forward, calm but unstoppable. Jake whistled low. "Lord, they look like a cavalry." "They are," I said. Slowly, almost lazily, the bulls fanned out across the pasture. To any rancher, it was just a controlled drive, steady, deliberate, ordinary. But to the 500 campers clutching their solo cups and selfie sticks, it looked like the ground itself had come alive. Gasps turned to shrieks. Phones shot up into the air. Drones buzzed overhead, catching every second of the bull march. Livestream counters ticked upward in real time. Karen, ever the general of her doomed army, snatched up her megaphone. "Don't panic," she shouted, her voice cracking. "Stand your ground, he's bluffing." But no one believed her, not with 24 bulls snorting, tossing their heads, horns flashing in the sunlight. One younger bull kicked up his heels, sending dirt flying like shrapnel. The crowd scattered, tripping over their tents, dragging kids toward cars. A food truck peeled out so fast nachos spilled across the gravel. Someone tipped over a generator, sparks hissing in the dry grass. Folding chairs collapsed, coolers flew open, beer cans rolled into the dust. Karen clung to her plastic table, shouting over the chaos. "This is harassment. This is dangerous. He's endangering innocent families." Right on cue, one of the bulls brushed against a shiny golf cart parked too close. The metal crumpled like a soda can. Its alarm wailed across the field. The bull didn't even flinch. He just kept walking, but the crowd, they lost it. "Call 911, someone screamed. "They're going to kill us." Funny thing is, I already had. The sheriff's cruiser rolled up just as the herd reached the heart of the campground. He stepped out, adjusted his hat, and let out a low whistle. "Well, I'll be," he muttered. "That's one way to clear a trespass." Karen ran toward him, red-faced, waving her megaphone like a weapon. "Arrest him. Arrest that rancher right now. He unleashed wild animals on innocent families." The sheriff raised an eyebrow. "Ma'am, those aren't wild animals. Those are livestock, and according to this notice," he unfolded the paper I'd filed the day before. "He told us this drive was happening. He's within his rights." Karen sputtered, her face twitching. But look at them, they're terrifying." The sheriff glanced at the bulls, calm as statues, their handlers guiding them with low whistles. "They look better behaved than half the folks driving ATVs out here." We kept the bulls moving, slow and steady, guiding them with staffs and signals. Not a single person was harmed, but you wouldn't know it from the screaming. Parents dragging kids by the arm, teens crying into their phones. A luxury SUV backed into a ditch trying to escape, its alarm blaring as it bottomed out. By the time we reached the south pasture, the campground was a wreck. Collapsed tents, coolers scattered, ruts carved deep by RVs rushing to flee. Karen stood trembling, her hat crooked, her clipboard bent in half. She raised her megaphone one last time, her voice cracking. "This isn't over. I'll have his ranch condemned if it's the last thing I do." The sheriff crossed his arms, eyes narrowing. "Ma'am, from where I'm standing, it looks like you endangered them. No permits, fire hazards, trespassing. You're lucky no one been hurt." Her megaphone slipped from her hand, clattering onto the trampled grass. She stood red-faced and shaking while the last of the bulls moved through the gate. I tipped my hat, shut the gate behind them, and just like that, the pasture was quiet again. But deep down, I knew it wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Because humiliation does humble people like Karen. It fuels them. And the war she started, it was only just beginning. The dust had barely settled when I realized something. Humiliation doesn't break people like Karen. It makes them dangerous. By the time my bulls were grazing quiet in the south pasture, she was already plotting her next move. I figured she'd retreat, lick her wounds, maybe hide behind her clipboard for a while. I was wrong. The very next morning, a manila envelope landed in my mailbox. Bold letters across the front, emergency injunction, filed by none other than HOA President Karen. I tore it open and laughed so hard I spilled coffee on the papers. Endangerment, reckless intimidation with livestock, psychological distress to innocent campers. She wanted the court to ban me from moving cattle across so-called community property. She even accused me of animal cruelty for walking bulls through my own pasture. It was so absurd it almost felt like a joke, but I knew better. Courts take injunctions seriously even when they're ridiculous, and Karen wasn't just playing petty anymore, she was playing legal. I drove straight into town, papers in hand, and walked into my lawyer friend Dale's office. Dale was the kind of man who could smell a bad case before he even read it. He flipped through the complaint, shaking his head. "She's trying to paint you as a rogue cowboy," he muttered. "But the good news, your prep work makes her look like the clown." And he was right, because while Karen had been waving her megaphone, I'd been stacking receipts. Photos of trespassing campers tearing down my fences, trail cam footage of strangers cutting wire and siphoning water from my stock tanks, videos of me politely notifying the sheriff ahead of the bull drive, and the golden ticket, an official letter from animal control confirming the bulls were healthy, controlled, and legally moved. Corinne had drama, I had facts. But she wasn't finished, not by a long shot. That weekend, a convoy of county vehicles rolled up my road. Environmental inspectors, a fire marshal, even a public health agent. They all claimed they'd received anonymous complaints about unsafe conditions on my ranch. I didn't need 3 guesses to know who filed those complaints. The inspectors poked around my property, clipboards in hand. They checked water troughs, sniffed the air, walked the fence line. But the more they saw, the worse their expressions got, not at me, but at the trash heap the HOA campers had left behind. The fire marshal wrote citations for illegal bonfires and fuel storage. The environmental officer nearly gagged at the gray water dumped straight into my soil. The health agent issued fines for unpermitted food trucks and waste disposal. Every violation Corinne tried to pin on me boomeranged right back at her HOA. Meanwhile, she doubled down, marched around the subdivision with her clipboard, gathering signatures for a petition to revoke my grazing rights. She even staged a press conference on the cul-de-sac, ranting about a dangerous rancher terrorizing families. But the cameras didn't capture a martyr. They captured a woman unraveling, red-faced, shouting, waving papers while her neighbors stood awkwardly behind her. And when reporters asked about the county citations, she snapped, "Lies, fabricated by the rancher." Fabricated? Hard to sell that story when drone footage showed porta-potties leaking onto the grass. Her sponsors bylaid. Local businesses that had slapped logos on her Freedom Campout pulled support overnight. The HOA's insurance carrier froze coverage, citing pending investigations into unpermitted events. And without coverage, every fine, every damage claim, every cleanup bill came straight from the HOA budget. And who sat at the top of that sinking ship? Corinne. I almost felt sorry for her, almost. But I stayed quiet. No interviews, no rants. I let the evidence do the talking. Behind the scenes, I kept stacking receipts. Every citation, every drone clip, every inspector's report went into my binder. And when I finally filed my own complaint against the HOA, trespass, property damage, nuisance, environmental violations, attorney's fees, it hit the court like a hammer. The sheriff even backed me up with a supplemental report. He confirmed the livestock movement was lawful, confirmed the panic had been caused by the campers themselves, not the bulls. By the time our first court date was scheduled, Corinne's emergency injunction had already collapsed under the weight of my evidence. The judge tossed it like yesterday's newspaper. But Corinne, she didn't quit. She turned her HOA newsletter into a propaganda sheet, whisper campaigns about dangerous livestock, letters accusing me of terrorizing families. She even pushed for special assessments to cover rising legal fees, blaming me for dragging the community into court. And her neighbors, they weren't buying it. Their dues were skyrocketing. Their lawns were being fined into oblivion. Board meetings turned into screaming matches. One tired-looking dad told a reporter, "Honestly, I'd rather live next to the bulls than deal with Corinne." And I couldn't have scripted it better myself. Every day that passed, Corinne dug her own hole deeper. And me, I just kept stacking my receipts higher. Because I knew something Corinne didn't. The climax wasn't the bulls marching through a campground. It wasn't the sheriff shrugging at her clipboard. The real battle was coming. And when that gavel finally dropped, I wouldn't just win. I'd bury her. By the time the first court date rolled around, the HOA was bleeding from every vein Corinne had opened. Fines, citations, cleanup bills. It was like watching a slow-motion car wreck. But Corinne, she strutted like a peacock. Bright lipstick like war paint, clipboard clutched in her hand. She swore she was going to have me condemned by the judge. And maybe she even believed it. That's the dangerous thing about people like Corinne. They confuse noise with power. They think shouting louder means they're winning. I almost hoped she'd keep believing her own lies, because confidence makes the fall hurt that much more. But before the courtroom showdown came one last desperate stunt. The weekend before the trial, the HOA staged another event. Smaller this time, but just as reckless. They called it Family Fun Day. their attempt to reclaim the so-called Greenbelt. Maybe 100 people showed up instead of 500, but it was still a circus. Bounce houses, food stands, karaoke blasting off a portable stage. I sat on my porch, sipping coffee, shaking my head. The audacity. After everything, after citations and fines and lawsuits, Karen still had the nerve to drag families back onto my pasture. And sure enough, trouble came faster this time. One of my bulls lounged by the south fence, chewing cud, calm as a boulder. Then a drone buzzed too close, its blades whining like a hornet. The bull tossed his head, startled. The crowd screamed like the sky was falling. Parents sprinted. Kids cried. People trampled tents and coolers. In the panic, one bull brushed against a shiny SUV parked near the fence. The metal caved in with a sickening crunch. Its alarm blared across the field. No one was hurt, not a scratch. But perception is louder than truth. Within minutes, shaky phone videos hit social media. Clips edited to look like my bulls had charged, like families were seconds from being trampled. Hashtags popped up. Rumors spread. And of course, Karen was right in the middle of it, megaphone in hand, shouting into cameras. He's endangering innocent families. He unleashed his animals on us again. The sheriff's cruiser rolled in, lights flashing. But this time, he didn't look at me. He looked straight at Karen. "Ma'am," he said, voice clipped, no patience left. "You've ignored county orders, hosted unpermitted events, endangered public safety. This ends today." Karen's face went red. She clutched her clipboard like a shield. "He's the danger. He's weaponizing wild animals against us." The sheriff pointed at the bulls, still calm, still chewing, their hides gleaming in the sun. "Those animals are on his property. They didn't trespass. You did." Then he gave the order, "Evacuate." Deputies moved in, directing cars out in single file. Families scrambled to pack up. Kids clutched toys. Food vendors yanked cords from generators. Karen shouted into her megaphone, voice cracking, trying to rally them. But no one listened. Her words fell flat against the roar of engines and tires crunching gravel. By sunset, the so-called family fun day was nothing but a field of trash bags and broken equipment. Karen stood alone in the middle of it, clipboard trembling in her hands, fury shaking her shoulders. She jabbed her finger across the fence at me. "I'll see you in court, rancher. I'll bury you there." I tipped my hat, looking forward to it. And I meant it. Because while Karen thought the courtroom was her salvation, I knew it was my battlefield. 2 weeks later, we stood before the judge. Karen arrived flanked by 3 lawyers the HOA could barely afford. They wore sharp suits, armed with binders and bluster. She wore a bright red blazer, lipstick like fresh blood, her face carved into that permanent smirk. Me, I walked in with Dale, just Dale. One lawyer carrying a single binder thicker than a family Bible. Inside it, every photo, every video, every citation, every receipt. Karen's team went first. They painted me as a reckless cowboy. They claimed I terrorized families with feral livestock. They played shaky phone clips of bulls walking calmly but narrated them like horror films. Children screamed in fear. Families fled for their lives. And when they finished, Karen leaned back in her chair like she'd already won. Then Dale stood. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't posture. He laid out the evidence with surgical precision. Survey maps proving the so-called Greenbelt was deeded pasture, 40 years older than the subdivision. Trail cam footage of campers cutting fences with bolt cutters. Drone clips of tents pitched right under no trespassing signs. Sheriff's reports confirming my livestock drive was scheduled and lawful. County citations, every single one against the HOA. Insurance letters freezing coverage due to their violations. And then Dale pulled out one last document. The A-side kept quiet. Tax lien receipts. While Karen had been waving megaphones, I'd been busy, quietly buying up delinquent tax liens tied to several HOA common parcels, which meant, if they defaulted, I had first claim on their so-called Greenbelt. The judge flipped through the documents. his eyebrows climbing higher with each page. "So, not only did the HOA trespass," he said slowly, "but their president misrepresented ownership of land they don't even control." Karen's smirk collapsed. The ruling was swift. The court dismissed Karen's claims, upheld my rights, ordered the HOA to pay damages for trespass, nuisance, property damage, and legal fees. On top of that, the HOA had to reimburse county fines and fund repairs to my pasture. And with the liens in hand, I had leverage over parts of their own common areas. Karen had tried to steal my land, and in the end, I walked away with leverage over hers. The gavel cracked like a rifle shot. Case closed. Karen slumped in her chair, clipboard sliding to the floor. Her neighbors whispered, not about fighting me anymore, but about replacing her. And me, I walked out of that courtroom lighter than air. Not because I'd crushed her, but because I'd done it the right way, with patience, preparation, and a little help from 24 bulls. When the gavel dropped, it didn't just end the case. It shattered Karen's empire like glass under a boot. The HOA board, once her loyal chorus, sat in stunned silence as the judge's words sank in. They weren't whispering about victory anymore. They were whispering about survival, about money, about how much this disaster was going to cost them. And the costs came fast. The settlement terms landed like bricks. The HOA was ordered to pay for every scrap of damage their campout had caused. Fence repairs, soil restoration, water testing for contamination, reseeding pastures where RVs had carved deep ruts. They were fined for illegal dumping, fire code violations, unpermitted gatherings, and every last one of my attorney's fees. But the judge didn't stop there. He added something none of us saw coming, a community restitution project. That meant HOA dues, the same dues Karen had bragged about controlling, were now funneled into something useful. Rebuilding fences, cleaning trash, funding scholarships for local kids who wanted to learn ranching skills. In other words, the HOA had to pay to fix what they broke and invest in the very lifestyle Karen had mocked. The irony was thick enough to cut with a knife. And Karen, she didn't take it well. Within a week, she resigned. Not willingly, she was forced out. That HOA meeting was chaos. Neighbors packed the hall, clutching skyrocketing dues notices and copies of county fines. A tired mom shouted that Karen's stunt had cost her family 3 months of mortgage payments. A retired veteran slammed his fist on the table and said, "You turned this HOA into a circus." Karen tried to defend herself. Her clipboard shook in her hands, her voice cracked, but it was no use. The board voted her out on the spot. She stormed out red-faced, muttering about appeals and revenge, but everyone knew the game was over. The new board president, a gray-haired gentleman named Harris, came to see me personally. He walked up to my gate, hat in hand, and said the words I'd been waiting years to hear. "On behalf of the HOA, we're done fighting you. Let's fix this fence and move on." I shook his hand. That's all I ever wanted. And for the first time in years, the fence line wasn't a battlefield. It was just a boundary. Over the next month, the transformation was surreal. Crews hauled out trash bags by the truckload. Volunteers from the subdivision, the same folks who once cheered Karen's speeches, came with gloves and rakes, sweating under the sun as they reseeded grass. Kids in sneakers hammered fence staples alongside my wranglers, laughing when the wire snapped tight. The fence line, once torn and trampled, was rebuilt stronger than ever. And me, for the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was living in the middle of a war zone. One evening, as the sun sank orange over the hills, I walked the repaired north gate alone. The cedar post felt solid under my hand. My bulls grazed quiet in the south pasture, their shadows long and calm. No bonfires, no thumping music, no RVs clogging the road, just peace. The land hadn't just survived, it had reclaimed its dignity. As for Karen, she vanished from the subdivision soon after. Rumor had it she sold her house at a loss and moved 2 towns over. Maybe she found another HOA to terrorize. Maybe she didn't. Either way, she wasn't my problem anymore. But here's the best twist of all. Thanks to those tax liens I'd quietly purchased months earlier, I now held leverage over several HOA common parcels. Not because I wanted them. I didn't need them. But because it meant they could never try a stunt like that again. Every board meeting from then on had to acknowledge, in writing, that the rancher next door wasn't to be crossed lightly. And honestly, I didn't feel vindictive. I felt steady, like the land itself had delivered justice. Slow, deliberate, unshakable. My father used to say, "The land fights for us if we respect it." And standing at that fence line, watching my bulls graze in the fatting light, I believed him more than ever. Sometimes you don't win by shouting louder. You win by standing your ground, by stacking your receipts higher than their lies, by letting patience weigh heavier than noise. That's how you turn humiliation into justice. That's how you end a war without ever firing a shot. I leaned on the gate, the evening breeze soft on my face, and whispered a quiet thank you to my dad, for the binder he left me, for the lessons about patience and paperwork, for reminding me that ranchers don't need to start wars. We just need to stand. And when the dust settles, the truth does the rest. Karen was gone from the board, but people like her never just vanish quietly. Even stripped of her title, she tried to claw her way back into the spotlight. Anonymous letters showed up in mailboxes, warnings about dangerous livestock and reckless ranching practices. HOA newsletters carried whispers about families traumatized by the bulls. But her words didn't land the way they used to. Because neighbors had seen the truth with their own eyes. They'd watched her circus collapse. They paid the fines, felt the sting of dues rising, and realized who had truly cost them. The same people who once cheered her megaphone speeches now turned their backs. Parents muttered about moving out. Retirees grumbled about selling. Even the kids who once tore down my no trespassing signs now nodded at me when they biked past the fence. The new board president, Harris, did his best to calm the storm. He organized cleanup crews. He negotiated down some of the county fines. He even came to shake my hand again, this time with 2 of his board members in tow. "Let's rebuild trust," he said quietly. "We're neighbors, not enemies." For the first time, I believed it. But Karen, she wasn't finished. She filed appeals, each one weaker than the last, each one thrown out faster than it hit the docket. She muttered to reporters about conspiracies and corruption. She accused me of bribing the sheriff, of manipulating the courts, of buying loyalty with bulls. But her voice was different now, shrill, desperate. Because once the mask slips, it never goes back on. Her neighbors stopped listening. Her board stopped funding her. Even the local news stopped giving her airtime. And eventually, she disappeared altogether. Some said she sold her house at a loss. Others claimed she skipped town to avoid debts. One neighbor swore they saw her in the next county, clipboard still in hand, trying to bully another HOA. Maybe that's true, maybe it is. All I know is she wasn't my problem anymore. And without her shadow looming, the land healed. For the first time in years, I walked the fence line without dread curling in my gut. The cedar post stood tall, wire stretched tight. Fresh grass pushed through where ruts had once scarred the soil. The bulls grazed steady, calm as the horizon itself. I caught myself stopping at the north gate more often, running a hand across the repaired wood. It felt stronger now, not just because of the work, but because of what it represented. That boundary had been tested, trampled, mocked, and ignored, and yet in the end it stood. Just like me. And that's the thing people don't tell you about boundaries. They're not just about keeping others out. They're about keeping yourself intact. Every insult Karen threw, every letter she mailed, every trespass she staged, they weren't just attacks on my land, they were attacks on my dignity. But by standing firm, quietly, patiently, steadily, I didn't just protect the ranch. I protected myself. I learned that sometimes the strongest answer isn't shouting. It isn't swinging fists. It isn't stooping to their level. It's patience, it's paperwork. It's trusting that the truth, like the land, will hold. Because the land doesn't lie. Property lines, survey maps, fences, they don't bend to noise, they don't cave to megaphones, they stand silent, waiting for the day the noise burns itself out. And when it does, all that's left is the truth. One evening after the repairs were done, after the volunteers had gone home, I leaned on the fence with a cup of coffee. The sun dipped low, staining the sky in orange and purple. Crickets sang in the tall grass. My bulls moved slow in the distance, steady as mountains. For the first time in years, I opened the windows of my house at night. I let the summer breeze drift in. I listened to the land breathe again. And I realized something my father had tried to teach me long ago. You don't win by force, you win by respect. Respect for the land, respect for the truth, respect for yourself. Karen thought she could shout me down, drown me out, bury me under noise and numbers. But noise doesn't last. Patience does. And in the end, it wasn't her clipboard or her megaphone or her lawyers that mattered. It was a binder of survey maps, a handful of receipts, 24 bulls moving steady through a pasture. That was enough. More than enough. The road was quiet again. No RVs, no neon tents, no strangers spilling beer across my gravel drive. Just silence. The kind of silence that settles over a ranch after a storm has passed. I leaned on the north gate, the same one Karen's circus once trampled, and felt the breeze brush against my face. The fence was new, cedar posts solid and straight, but the land around it still carried scars. Bare patches where grass had been torn up. Shallow ruts from camper tires. A corner where the soil still smelled faintly of burnt wood from their fire pits. Scars fade, but they don't disappear. And maybe that's the lesson. Because life leaves marks, too, from people who push too hard, from battles you didn't ask for, from voices that try to tell you your boundaries don't matter. But scars aren't just reminders of what's been lost. They're proof of what survived. My bulls grazed in the south pasture, calm, steady, unbothered. The sun dropped low behind them, turning their shadows long and dark across the field. To anyone else, they were just animals. To me, they were family. Living proof that patience and preparation outweigh chaos every time. I thought about my father then, about the binder he left me, full of survey maps and livestock laws, about the words he used to say when I was young. The land will fight for you, son, if you respect it. Back then, I didn't fully understand, but now I did. Because Karen hadn't just tried to take land, she tried to take dignity. She tried to paint me as selfish, reckless, dangerous. She'd thrown everything she had, megaphones, lawyers, petitions, inspectors, even mobs of campers. And yet, none of it stood against the truth. Not because I shouted louder, not because I swung harder, but because I stood still, patient, steady like the bulls. And when the time came, the truth walked through the pasture like a wall of muscle and horn, scattering lies like paper in the wind. That's what boundaries are, not lines drawn in dirt, not fences hammered into place. Boundaries are dignity. They're the quiet, steady voice that says, "This is mine, this is who I am, this matters." And when someone tries to trample it, whether it's a neighbor, a board, a boss, or a so-called leader with a clipboard, you don't always need to fight fire with fire. Sometimes you just need to stand. Slow, steady, unshakable. The subdivision next door changed after that. Not overnight, but slow, like soil healing after rain. The new board under Harris stopped sending petty letters. They waved instead of scowling when they drove by. Some even volunteered on my side of the fence, hammering wire, hauling trash, planting grass. The line between us stopped being a battlefield. It became what it was always meant to be, a boundary. And boundaries, once respected, bring peace. Karen, she became a ghost, a name neighbors whispered like a bad memory. Some swore they saw her 2 towns over, clipboard in hand, already starting new fights. Maybe that's true, maybe not. But I stopped caring. Because the ranch wasn't about her anymore. It never was. It was about legacy. About the ground my father left me. About the bulls that moved steady no matter the noise. About the quiet evenings when the crickets sang and the world felt right again. That's what mattered. That's what always mattered. And maybe that's the lesson I want you to take with you. In life, people will test your boundaries. They'll push. They'll prod. They'll tell you you're selfish for standing your ground. They'll dress their greed in words like community or common good. They'll try to make you feel small for protecting what's yours. But hear the truth. Standing firm isn't selfish. It's survival. And survival doesn't always look loud. Sometimes it looks quiet, patient, steady, like a rancher leaning on a fence post at dusk, like a herd of bulls moving slow but unstoppable through a field. That's how you win, not with noise, but with proof, with patience, with respect for yourself. Because noise fades, lies crumble, but truth endures. So if you're facing your own Karen, maybe it's a neighbor, a boss, a so-called friend, or even a voice in your own head, remember this. Paper weighs more than shouting, receipts cut sharper than insults, and patience is the strongest weapon you'll ever carry. Move like the bulls. Slow, steady, deliberate. And when the dust settles, you'll see who respected the boundary and who crumbled under their own noise. That's what my father taught me. That's what the land proved. And that's what I want to leave with you. You've heard this confession, now wait until you hear the next one. The truth that shatters everything you thought you knew.